All right, welcome back to history. If you are watching this video right now, you should have your history book and your activity book in front of you. You should have already looked through pages 213 through 215. You should have glanced through your activity book, page 152, 153. So you should have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to be talking to you about. I'm just going to hit some high points for you, review a little bit of what we talked about on Monday. So if you remember on Monday, we were talking about the Spanish-American War. We were talking about the causes of the Spanish-American War. Remember, this was a war between, obviously, Spain and America, but it was fought for really the independence of Cuba. Remember, there were three specific things that kind of brought us forward to this war. First of all was the treatment of the Cuban people as they were attempting to fight for their freedom from Spain. Remember, we had a problem with what we talked about with yellow journalism. Remember what yellow journalism does. It will sensationalize. It will bombard you with a particular point of reference, a particular point of view. Building on that, with the yellow journalism, what was the second thing that kind of propelled the United States in this action? And if you remember, that was that private letter from Delaune. I'm going to make sure I pronounced his name right. If I didn't, you can forgive me. Remember, he was not a fan of McKinley. McKinley, in his address to Congress in 1897, in December, he was saying, we're not going to get involved in an unjust war. However, if Spain does not take the honorable path as far as the Cuban people are concerned, the United States might have to move forward in an act of aggression. So remember that Delaune, he was the representative for Spain in the United States. And you can imagine that he did not take that type of rhetoric very kindly. And he writes this personal letter, basically not having very nice things to say about McKinley. This was a private correspondence that got into public hands, and Hearst published this in his newspaper. He frontlines it like worst insult to the United States ever, which really it wasn't. There was a lot of people who didn't like McKinley, but heaven forbid it's not what was said, it was who said it. And then what happened very quickly afterwards. We may never have remembered him or his letter had there not been the explosion on the USS Maine that sinks the ship and kills over 250 sailors. So now, all of a sudden, the United States, our hackles are rise. You've just, you don't kill Americans and get away with that. And that kind of propelled us into this Spanish-American War. We end up walking away with a lot of territory. We walk away with Cuba, we all walk away with Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. We eventually give Cuba their freedom after they agree that if foreign entities come into their land again looking to take over them, we can get involved, and that we get a military base there. So that was all part of that treaty. The Philippines will eventually get their freedom. Remember, the Philippine people did not want the Americans to rule over them. Great, Spain, America, whatever, just get out. They were never happy with that, and they eventually gained their freedom after World War II. We know that the fighting basically ends in August, but the war isn't officially over until the Treaty of Paris in December of 1898. So we see now this kind of imperialist attitude that people, within the United States, they're saying, if people don't want us to govern them, we have no business governing them. They have a point. They really have a point with that. A little add-on before we move on. In 1976, American naval investigators conclude that the Maine explosion, the explosion that killed those sailors and that sunk their ship, that walked us really into that Spanish-American War. Naval investigators in 1976 conclude that the main explosion was likely caused by a fire that ignited its ammunition stock, not a Spanish mine or sabotage. Something to think about, that sometimes we think we know what's happening, but in reality, we may not know as much as we think we do. Self-included. So always remember, we need to be very thorough about decisions we make. So here we are. We also annexed Hawaii during this time. Again, were the Hawaiian people wanting that? Probably not. But it was a very important position as far as the world was starting to get smaller. So the United States needed it. We needed it as a naval base to protect our interests. We did it. Hawaii will eventually become the 50th state in the United States in 1959, but Alaska will beat it. Alaska will be the 49th state because it entered the Union in January of 1959, where Hawaii entered in August of 1959. So our 49th and 50th states there. We also start hearing about a hero of the Rough Riders, Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, and that's really who's going to be our focus of what we're going to be talking about today. He is now probably a very beloved person, leading the Rough Riders, having that military victory that he had in Cuba. He will become the 26th president of the United States. He becomes McKinley's vice president after his first vice president passes away. Garrett Hobart dies in 1899, and Roosevelt becomes McKinley's second vice president. McKinley then, as he was entering his second term, is assassinated in office, bringing Roosevelt forward to become the 26th president of the United States. One of the terms that you're seeing in your book and that you really need to take note of is called the Progressive Era. That's on page 213. It's right at the beginning of your reading. You should already kind of be knowing that I've already read that. Notice what it says in your book. Progressives wanted changes to improve their nation. They were concerned with living conditions. We see people, you guys have been doing your biographies, people going in and saying, look at what people are living in. We've got to do something about this. They were concerned about their morals. But here's the little linchpin of that causes a little bit of a problem. If you look down into your second paragraph, it says progressives often dealt with problems in a scientific way. The problem with that is science can tell you what something is. Science cannot tell you this is right or this is wrong. Science can tell you when you live too close together and you don't have good water and you don't have good sanitation, disease will come up and disease will start killing people. Science can tell you these are the facts around it. Science does not say this is right or this is wrong. We need to have a moral standard. That's why we as followers of Jesus Christ, when I say that loving your neighbor is right, I don't say loving your neighbor is right because I say it's right. I say it's right because there's a standard outside of me that says you're to love your neighbor as you love yourself. There's a standard outside of me that says that you are to not kill, that you are to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is outside of me. That is not me making that determination. And the problem is when sinful man comes together, how are you ever going to get an agreement on what we say is right and what we say is wrong without somebody outside us saying that? And that's God. God is our moral standard. We ourselves, y'all, you see what we do when we set our moral standards. It's not going to work out very good. So that's kind of the problem with the progressive movement. Great, they're seeing a problem, but you can't scientifically say that that's wrong. You can morally say that's wrong, but not scientifically. Science doesn't say right or wrong. Science says this is what this is. So that's kind of the issue with the progressives. They're trying to bring morality into science, and it doesn't work that way. You know that, I know that. So you see that final sentence. Many progressives had faith in science abilities. Kind of doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to bring about improvements, and we know that that's not the way it works, right? The progressives had a right idea, but they wanted to be the master of their own fate, and that doesn't work like that. God is the know-all, be-all, end-all. He is creator. He is all good. And that's the thing. We want to be good outside ourselves. And when we're good outside ourselves, when we're defining good, how I might define good might not be the way you define good. How I define right might not be the same way you define right. So we need somebody outside of us to say, this is what is good. This is what is right. And God does that. When we lean on God's definition, we know we will always have the right definition. So this is Roosevelt. This is kind of where he's moving with this. We see that, Roosevelt, though born into prosperity, did not have, a very easy go of it. We see his mom and his wife, his first wife, dying within the same year. We see that he kind of retreats, kind of gathers himself back together, but does he stay in the background? No, he doesn't. He comes back, he returns, he remarries, he runs for mayor of New York. He loses that. If you're following with me, you're on page 214. He eventually becomes the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He becomes very famous with the Spanish-American War, and then he becomes the vice president and eventually the president. We see Roosevelt doing a lot of good things. Don't get me wrong. He was doing a lot of good things. One of the things that he was doing was he was trust busting. And really what he was doing is these large companies would get together and they would say, okay, we're all going to be in agreement. We're going to set the price for X product at this amount. And if we all stay at this amount, everybody's going to have to pay it if they want it. Well, the problem is they were setting these inflated prices, trying kind of like price gouging, $100 for a roll of toilet paper. Please, come on now. But that's what they were doing. If we set this higher price and if you want what we have, you're just going to have to pay it. So Teddy Roosevelt, he was coming in and he was going to say, yeah, no, I'm going to grab my attorney general and we're going to break this up. He did that with the meat market. He did it with another market. And so he was very, very proactive in trying to make sure things are done fair and right. Another thing that Roosevelt was very famous for was the Reclamation Act of 1902. And this was conservation. This is proper care of our lands, making sure that our lands are in a good place for all our future generations. And we can't say that Roosevelt did everything right. Heaven forbid. Do I do everything right? Nope. Do you do everything right? Nope. But we can say that he did work hard for the American people. So I want you to keep all of that in mind. I want you to go ahead and look at your activity book. Let's just look at a few things. Remember, you should have read this through, so you should be really familiar with this already. So you tell me, how did Theodore Roosevelt become the 26th president of the United States? Who remembered what happened to McKinley? He was assassinated. That's right. He was killed in office. The word for that is assassinated. He was killed in office. What was Roosevelt's early life? Yes, he was born into affluence. His parents were very wealthy, but he was a sickly child. But did he stay a sickly child? Did he let that define him? No, he didn't. So the rest of these, I'm going to ask you to kind of work through on your own. Do the true and false. If it's false, write the correct word for the underlined word on page 153. This is a study guide. These are things you're going to have to know for when the quiz comes up and when the test comes up. I will do a PowerPoint for these, but I would like for you to do this first. You work this through first, get your answers on your own first, and then come to the PowerPoint slide and make sure that you're correct. Because if you go to the PowerPoint slide first, let's be honest, then are you doing the work? No, you're taking my work. And what do we call that? Cheating. That's absolutely right. And though I'm not here, I've already told you, I don't need to catch you at that kind of stuff. God's already got that. So remember, whatever you do, do it right, as to the Lord and not unto men. Right? Excellent. So you work the study guide on your own. I will do a PowerPoint that has the answers for you after you work the study guide. Solo first, check your work second. All right, so here's where we're going to leave. We're going to leave with Teddy Roosevelt. He's going to serve in office, and then he's going to retire out. He's going to say, peace out. I'm going to go live my life now. I think I've worked for the American people long enough. So that's where we're going to leave him, and that's where I'm going to leave you until Friday. So keep up the good work, and I'll catch you later. Bye.